Out, they have the capacity to uncover a whole lot more, as police in Australia are using the growing genetic database to find the identities of so-called cold cases, unknown human remains, often decades old. Also, with the eyes of the world on events in Gaza, hear how tech can make sure that any reportage, videos or photos are accurate and not doctored. That's all coming up after this.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. Hundreds of aid workers are gathering on the Egyptian side of the Rafah crossing amid uncertainty over when deliveries of food, water and medical supplies into Gaza will begin. It follows an agreement brokered by the US President Joe Biden, Wira Davis reports.
As trucks carrying aid queue on the Egyptian side of Gaza's southern border, the UN and international aid agencies have become increasingly alarmed at the unfolding humanitarian crisis. On a visit to Israel that lasted barely a day, while reaffirming his steadfast support, Joe Biden also pressed the case for aid for Gaza's 2.5 million Palestinian citizens, many of whom are struggling to get access to food, water and medical supplies. Then, on the plane home, the president told reporters that a deal had been reached. Egypt had agreed to let an initial 20 trucks in through the Rafah crossing. The aid will be delivered under UN supervision, with the president saying it might not arrive until Friday.
There have been further cross-border exchanges of fire between Israeli forces and Hezbollah militants in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah, which is backed by Iran, said 2 of its fighters were killed on Wednesday. The border skirmishes have raised concerns in Israel that it could face a two-front war. Lise Doucette explains.
Iran in particular sees itself as the standard bearer of Muslims worldwide, including Palestinians, and it will feel bound to do something if the situation in the Gaza Strip escalates even further and there are more horrific images of Gazan suffering. And that's the fear not just of Israelis, but every single leader in the region and the Western leaders who are coming here one after the other. As worried as they are about the Gaza-Israel war, they don't want this contagion to spread. And that fire was lit already. We saw the simmering anger in recent days in protests.
One of China's biggest property developers, Country Garden, has denied reports that its founder and chairwoman have fled the country. The company, which has total estimated debts of about $200 billion, has been battling to stave off default for several weeks. Theo Leggett has this report.
Country Garden is a real estate giant, but a sharp slowdown in China's property market has brought the company to its knees. It failed to make a $15.4 million interest payment when it became due in September, and a 30-day grace period came to an end on Wednesday. It's still not clear whether or not the payment was made. If it was not, that could trigger a default on billions of dollars worth of overseas borrowing, leading to a major financial restructuring. Against this background, Country Garden described reports that the chairwoman and founder had fled as malicious rumours and insisted both of them were working normally in China.
World News from the BBC. Researchers from the International Atomic Energy Agency have taken samples of fish and seawater from a port near the Fukushima nuclear power plant for the first time. Japan has been taking regular samples since it began releasing wastewater from the stricken facility in August. Shaima Khalil reports.
In addition to seawater, the team of scientists from China, South Korea and Canada will collect samples of fish and seabed residue to compare the levels of tritium and other radioactive substances from those taken last year. The samples will be sent to labs in the respective countries for independent review. China has sharply reacted to the discharge by imposing a blanket ban on Japanese seafood imports. The wastewater has gone through a liquid processing system that removes most radionuclides except tritium.
Russia says its foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has met the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. Earlier, Mr. Lavrov criticised the US and its allies, Japan and South Korea, for pursuing what he called a dangerous military policy towards North Korea. A court in Pakistan has granted protective bail to the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif ahead of his planned return from self-imposed exile. That means he can't be arrested before a scheduled court appearance next week. Mr. Sharif, who's been living in London, became a fugitive when he failed to appear before a Pakistani court in 2019 after his conviction for corruption. The authorities in Slovenia's capital, Ljubljana, say they'll restage an auction to lease one of the city's most sought-after roast chestnut stalls for the winter season. The prize stall had gone for a record price, $53,000, many times what it went for last year. But the winning bidder failed to pay. Other participants have alleged the winner inflated the price to prevent competition with his restaurant at the same location, which also offers roast chestnuts. That's the latest. BBC News.
I want to quote one of the great poets of the modern age, who said, "Look around. Everywhere you turn is heartache. It's everywhere that you go. You try everything you can to escape the pain of life that you know." Not content with diagnosing the problems of the modern world, this sage also suggested solutions. When all else fails and you long to be somewhere better than you are today, I know a place where you can get away. It's called a dance floor, and here's what it's for, so come on, Vogue. That was Philosophy from Madonna. I'm Marnie Chesterton from the BBC World Service. This is Unexpected Elements. And I'm here with today's panel. From Singapore, we have Katie Silver. Hello, Katie.
Hi, Marnie.
And from Nairobi, Kenya, it's Phyllis Mwate. Hello, Phyllis.
Hi, Marnie. Hujambo.
This is the show that takes a recent story from the news and uses that as a launchpad for other stories linked by a science theme. Events in Israel and Gaza have dominated the news this past week, but it's a fast-moving story, and the World Service's many news programmes are better placed to give you the analysis you need. There are other news stories out there, though, and we've picked one that will hopefully offer a bit of light scientific relief during these difficult times. I started by quoting Madonna because she is in the news this week, kicking off her global greatest hits tour.
A certain lady has got everybody sizzling in their seats. Madonna is in town.
Madonna's recent tour has brought a new generation to her live performances.
Her Celebration World Tour.
I could dance and I could sing, and I begged them to let me sing one song.
Whatever she is, she's vastly entertaining.
We admire how superwoman she is.
Maybe in the interests of BBC impartiality, I should say that other live music events are available. But this is a singer with 40 years of hits, genre-defining dress styles and constant reinventions, and she's been a massive global influence on pop music. As she said, music makes the people come together, and celebrating that idea, Unexpected Elements will be taking 3 of her hits, interpreting them scientifically, and seeing where that takes us. Phyllis, you're starting us off with Madonna's first #1 hit from 1984, It's Like a Virgin.
And from that title, where would I go apart from virgin birth?
We're talking science here, right?
Yes, we are. So virgin birth, the scientific term is called parthenogenesis. So when living things reproduce, they either do it sexually or asexually. We know about sex involving males and females, but some species have the ability to reproduce and pass on their genes even when they can't find a male. So it is thought that parthenogenesis may be a mechanism by which things that live in challenging climates or environments, such as deserts, might have been able to keep going during challenging times.
See, that sounds much more efficient than the human method, because to make a human, for example, you usually need 2 sex chromosomes. You get 1 from each parent, and everyone gets an X. You get that from the mum, and if you get a second X, you get a female, and if you get a Y, you get a male. And that second X or that Y, they have to come from the father. So without a male to provide the Y chromosome, it sounds like you might not get any males.
Oh, yeah. There are a couple of mechanisms, Manny, but the most common ones do only produce females. That's XX. And the offspring are genetically identical. So you'd say they're essentially clones. This is what happens in plants mostly. However, in some vertebrate species, they also can do it, such as the Komodo dragons.
I do remember a while ago a Komodo dragon called Flora in a zoo in England suddenly reproduced with no male present, and none of her keepers saw it coming.
Indeed. So they say that a Komodo dragon could, in theory, populate a remote island on her own. This is one reason why it is thought to be such an old and stable species. But you see, a population of cloned Komodo dragons would also be very vulnerable to disease and infection, because with no variation in the population, then just one successful virus could wipe out all of them. And that is why they also, and more often, do reproduce sexually.
So bacteria do it, plants do it, even some complex vertebrates do it. But what about mammals? Is virgin birth actually possible in mammals?
In nature, we don't think so, Manny. However, scientists last year published work in which they had gene-edited some of the key genes in mammalian eggs, and this was to allow parthenogenetic reproduction of viable individuals. This was such a complicated and precise work, but they think it could have perhaps agricultural uses in the future.
Okay, I remember this work, and I remember it's groundbreaking stuff because, you get the beginnings of an embryo, but without two parents to make it. Thank you, Phyllis. And we've just shown that you can get a decent science discussion inspired by Madonna lyrics. Now, to demonstrate that some lyrics are actually testable by science, here's Alex and Ben with this week's Fact File.
Oh, hey Alex, are you okay?
Oh, I don't know, Ben. I'm finding the news pretty depressing, really. What have you been up to?
Well, I've been thinking about what Marnie said at the beginning of the show. That Madonna lyric about how music makes the people come together.
Feels like it's going to take a lot more than that to bring people together at the moment.
True, but there is some science that backs up Madonna's claim, at least in the context of live music.
Really?
Yeah. In 2018, neuroscientists from Canada found that when you go to a concert, your delta brainwaves synchronise with other people there.
Okay, so music really does make the people come together.
Yeah, or as the scientists put it, live music increases inter-subject synchronisation of audience members' brain rhythms.
And that's basically the same thing, right?
Pretty much. They found that when music was performed live, audience members' brainwaves became much more synchronised with one another compared to if they watched a recording.
And what exactly do you mean by synchronised?
Well, when they measured the brainwaves, the rhythms were synchronised in exactly the frequency range that corresponds to the beat of the music. So it looked as if the beat was driving audience brain rhythms.
So you can make people feel at one with each other when they're at a concert. Any news on ways of bringing people together more generally?
Sadly, I don't think I can help you with that one right now.
Science supporting Madonna's claim that music does make the people come together when it comes to brainwaves. Now it's your turn, Katie. Pick a Madonna track and tell me where you'd like to go.
I'm going to go with Ray of Light.
That's the one where Madonna sings quicker than a ray of light over and over again, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a song about someone or something flying faster than the speeding light, according to the lyrics.
Okay, well, that doesn't sound particularly grounded in physics.
No, well, I don't think she was expecting you to fact-check that, Marnie, but if we were to go back to Einstein's theory of relativity, it suggests that nothing could travel faster than the speed of light in a vacuum.
Which is how fast?
Just under 300,000 kilometres a second.
Okay, so the best we could do is roughly as quick as a ray of light.
Yeah, but that's a theory and it doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it? Harder to pair with that rhythm of Madonna's. But in 1994, a Mexican physicist called Miguel Alcubierre found a loophole.
Go on.
So Einstein says we live in a four-dimensional space-time. That is, the three dimensions we see and talk about all the time, and the fourth being time itself.
Okay, so there's one way of trying to envisage space-time. I mean, I remember this from gravitational waves, and physicists said, try and imagine a big stretchy rubber sheet, and then you put an object with mass on it, like a ball, and then that deforms the sheet. It sort of stretches the sheet, and the curvature of the sheet is a bit like the warping of space-time by gravity.
That's right. I remember watching a lot of videos about it. Very searchable. And it is a popular analogy. It's a lot more abstract than that, but it is a decent start when you're trying to think about it.
Good, because this is difficult for people, even smart people like me.
Yeah, and me too. That's true. So everything that moves across the sheet, and you can think of that as basically moving through space-time, those things can only accelerate up to the speed limit set by the speed of light. But the sheet itself, that can be deformed at any speed, which is probably what happened to the universe at the Big Bang.
Okay, so if you deform the sheet, then the universe can travel quicker than a ray of light.
Yeah, and faster than Madonna. So the thinking is that when the Big Bang happened, the original space-time structure expanded for a split second at speeds much faster than light. And even today, the expansion of the universe is driving galaxies away at speeds faster than light. And that means their light can no longer reach us here on Earth.
Okay, and that doesn't help if we want to travel quicker than a ray of light, though, does it?
Well, maybe it does. So Alcubierre suggested that if space-time were contracted in front of a spacecraft and basically expanded behind it to compensate, it would put the spaceship in a kind of warp bubble that would allow you to travel somewhere faster than the speed of light.
How do you get yourself a warp bubble?
I mean, I've looked. I don't know where we buy them, but that's the flaw in the plan, because you'd need to generate huge amounts of energy, and maybe by, for example, manipulating dark energy or some kind of weird matter that we don't know about yet. Maybe that's the way you could make one.
Okay, so it's technically possible, but only using things that we haven't discovered yet.
That was the thinking, but here's the cool bit. Last year, someone actually did manage to create a warp bubble.
This is very Star Trek. So we can travel to the future now?
Almost, but not quite. So you'll like this. The team who discovered it were from a place called the Limitless Space Institute, and they were working on a project funded by DARPA, which is a research agency of the US Defense Department.
I love DARPA way more than I should, given that they're a defense department, but they fund all sorts of fascinatingly bizarre science.
Well, they weren't trying to create this warp bubble. They were doing research in a fairly unrelated area. But when the engineer looked at the results, they found a structure that basically matched Alcubierre's theoretical warp bubble perfectly. It was almost like the way Coca-Cola was discovered, just by accident.
So please tell me we can travel at warp speed now.
No, sadly not yet. The bubble they observed is absolutely tiny, like nanoscale tiny. But as with all things science, there's that elusive prospect of future research, and I guess who knows what the future of the field will bring.
So it might be possible to travel quicker than a ray of light one day, but it's going to take a lot longer than a ray of light for us to get there.
That's right, but Madonna will be pleased that there's hope.
Phyllis, if you could travel somewhere quicker than a ray of light, where would you go?
To the future, if it was possible, but money, I would go climb Mount Everest. You know, I won't get the thrill of climbing Everest in 2 months that most people do, but I'll be among those that have reached the top. Cheating, but in a way, I mean, I'm there, right?
Yeah, climbing when you get to hitch a lift on a photon is cheating, is massively cheating.
Yes, but a struggle is not for me. If I can achieve it, then fine.
I respect that. I am with you. So thank you, Madonna. The genre-shifting singer has given us license to talk about virgin birth, brainwaves and warp drives. Still to come, she inspires a chat about the smallest record ever. After this. This is the part of the show where we put your obscure science know-how to the test. This week, things are getting a little frosty as we take a look at a strange, snowy phenomenon that can be found in polar and mountainous regions all around the world. Watermelon snow, also known rather gruesomely as glacier blood, describes summer snow that has taken on a pinkish red hue. It has a faintly fruity smell, but it's definitely not a refreshing frozen snack. It is reported to have a laxative effect. But what causes this mountainside blush? Is it A, algae, B, salt deposits, or C, eroding rocks? What's lying behind this technicolor snow? Is it A, algae, B, salt deposits, or C, eroding rocks? Make your guess, check back later in the show and find out if you're right. This is Unexpected Elements from the BBC World Service. Yes, this is a science show, but inspired by news of Madonna's world tour, we're looking at science linked to her songs. Now we're going to get into the groove. See what I did there? Joining us is Professor Peter Bergel, a physicist at the Technical University of Denmark in Copenhagen. Hello, Peter.
Hello.
So why might we describe you as being into the groove?
Well, first of all, I'm a massive music fan. So when we got this very, very special instrument that could carve extremely small patterns into surfaces, we thought, like, it's Christmas time, let's make a Christmas record. So we made the world's smallest Christmas record, actually in polymer, just like a vinyl record, and in principle playable. So that's what I guess I did to get into the groove.
And it's small enough that you could fit it inside one of the grooves of a normal vinyl record, right?
Yeah, if you took your eyebrow hair, which is the tiniest hair on the human body, and you cut it so you could see the cross section, you could easily put this record on the flat side. So it's really, really tiny.
So many questions. Why? Why being one? Let's start with why.
So me and actually quite a few here are firm believers that if we only do things that make sense, we won't get as far as if we sometimes play. The thing about playing is that kids do it for a reason. That's because it's the most efficient way of learning about the world. So it's an important thing for scientists to play. So this was a playful stunt. So we did it in part because it was fun, and in part because we know that when we get these kind of ideas of something really hard, we shouldn't let us stop just because we don't have a good reason for it.
So you've got this tiny vinyl record that you wanted to make. How did you go about that?
Yeah, we have this, so in nanotechnology, years ago, like decades ago, a fantastic machine called the atomic force microscope. It's actually a little bit like the needle on a pickup of an old-fashioned vinyl record player, except that it's way more accurate and way more sharp. Now, this is a special kind of that. You can imagine that it's like not just a player, but it's also capable of drilling or carving these ridges. So you can actually carve patterns into surfaces with extreme precision. So we need that obviously for the science. So we had this machine and we thought, like, we had spent a long time on optimizing it and thought, like, let's do something really hard with it. So we have this carving machine. You can think of it as, carving probably it describes it like engraving.
Yeah,
so
etching,
it means that if you have etching, if you have a specific pattern, like if you wanted to make all the Alps in a size that is smaller than cells, that would be pretty easy to do with this instrument. So for me, who has worked with what we call nanolithography, like how to make patterns on a small scale for like 3 decades, this is really something new, and it's really, in my opinion, a game changer because you can do some very important things with it.
Now, you said in theory playable. Can you actually play the records? Because I'm assuming that to do that you'd need a tiny hi-fi and maybe some tiny speakers.
So we thought a lot about it. We can definitely play it. We can play it by cheating, looking like we take the image and then we make a computer program that follows the track and decodes the patterns and turn that back into audio. That should be straightforward. It won't sound like high fidelity, but it would work. The much harder thing is to do an actual record player, but I think it's maybe a bit overdoing it. I mean, maybe we will do it this Christmas just for kicks and giggles, but that's a lot harder. Yeah.
So back to your record.
Yeah.
What does that mean that you can do for material science? I mean, what kind of things can you learn from being able to make a tiny, tiny record?
I mean, I almost passed out when I heard the story about the warp bubbles because it's just there's a very strange analogy to what we're doing.
Really?
Now, yeah, because we're talking about 3 dimensions plus 1, and what happens when you are utilizing the 4th dimension and do things with that. That's what we just talked about. Now, if you imagine that you just subtract 1 from all that, so you start out with a 2-dimensional space, and then you say, okay, let's try to go into the 3rd dimension, try to take this 2-dimensional world and take advantage that there's an extra dimension. Now, this is a spatial dimension. So when we start out with a material that is born as a 2-dimensional material, like completely flat, atomically flat, that's a very familiar material everybody knows. It's called graphite. So it's the one with pens and the thing you put in car tires and brakes and lots of other things.
And that counts as 2D?
It does, because it's like if you imagine a stack of cards on top of each other, every one of those cards is called graphene, and when you stack them up, it becomes graphite. And that means that one of these sheets is a two-dimensional layer. And that's why graphite is soft, because you can put it between your fingers and it will smear out. That's because these playing cards are gliding on each other. So the thing is, when you start with something that is two-dimensional, you have an extra dimension to play with. So what we want to do is to make some kind of warp bubbles, like small blisters and bubbles and deformations out of plane. If you imagine that you are putting a thin sheet down on something like a carpet, and then there's something under the carpet, then there will be a bump in the carpet right above the object. Let's imagine it's a Lego or something. So when we put our sheet, the two-dimensional graphene sheet, down on the surface that we have carved, just like the Christmas record, like you can imagine there's a landscape there, for a very specific one, the electrons go nuts. It's really like they have a psychosis or something. They behave completely different, and that's potentially very useful. It's not only interesting from a scientific point of view, but we're also looking in, can we make electronics in the future that doesn't use so much power and things like that. At the moment, it's just super exciting that electrons that pass an area where there's such a bump, like a dimensional bump, like it's happily thinking it's two-dimensional, suddenly it's being warped. It thinks that there's a gigantic magnetic field. Now, that is just to us completely crazy. This field can be like 300 Tesla. That is impossible to make with any kind of, even the biggest magnets will maybe do 40 or 50 Tesla.
Well, hang on. What's 300 Tesla?
If you take the biggest, most expensive permanent, like a steady magnet, like electromagnet, and it fills a big room and there's cooling everywhere and really high current supply, you can maybe get 40, 50 Tesla. So it's a magnitude of the magnetic field. But if you make a tiny bump in graphene, the electrons will experience a magnetic field that is 6 times larger than the biggest magnet that fills an entire room. Now, that is something that we simply have never had the opportunity to play with this kind of thing before. There's no textbook that describes what we would do if we could shape magnetic fields of this magnitude. So the record was a stunt, and it's playful and so on, but there's a very serious scientific reality behind these kinds of surfaces. So we can use them to trick electrons in 2D materials to think that there's a completely different situation that there really is.
That's amazing that atoms behave completely differently if there's the sort of nano equivalent of a bump in the carpet.
Exactly.
Professor Peter Bergil, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your weird, I think I'm allowed to say that, and wonderful discoveries.
Well, it was a pleasure to join, and have a nice day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Isn't that weird coincidence about warp bubbles?
No, when I was talking about them earlier, I didn't expect that they would reappear.
Yeah, I didn't expect it to be related through this is unexpected elements. Very interesting, and I liked how he's very passionate about it.
Wasn't it amazing, that kind of idea of just science for science sake, or playing around and seeing what comes? Like, it's such a playful approach, but really cool.
Thank you to Peter, and thank you also to Madonna, whose songs have inspired some pretty cool science conversations so far. Still to come on the show, police in Australia are using a growing database of DNA to uncover the identities of so-called cold cases, unknown human remains, often decades old. Also, with the eyes of the world on events in Gaza, I hear how tech can ensure that footage from there is real.
This is the BBC World Service, where Mike Wooldridge is presenting a new series, Africa's Urban Future.
By the end of the century, it's predicted that 3.9 billion people could be living in Africa.
Most of this staggering demographic growth will take place in Africa's cities.
The influx of people looking for a better life continues to come into urban areas.
Episode 3 of the series focuses on 2 of South Africa's biggest cities, Johannesburg and Cape Town.
Our federal grant allows us to build in the region of 2,000 fully subsidized free homes per year. But our waiting list in Cape Town is 600,000 people long. You just need to do the sums.
I'll be finding out how the cities might cope with the fastest urbanization in human history.
Africa's Urban Future. Tuesday at 8:30 and 19 GMT. Or listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Coming up after the news, police in Australia are using the growing bank of genetic data to uncover the identities of so-called cold cases, unknown human remains often decades old. Also, with the eyes of the world on events in Gaza, hear how tech can help make sure that any reportage, videos or photos are accurate and not doctored. That's on Unexpected Elements, coming up shortly.
BBC News with Moira Alderson. Aid is ready to be delivered from Egypt to Gaza, but it's not clear when it'll be allowed to cross the border. Food, water and medicines are in short supply in the territory, but the initial deliveries will be limited and Israel will allow them only as long as they don't reach Hamas. Continuing border skirmishes between Israeli forces and Hezbollah militants in southern Lebanon have raised concerns in Israel that it could face a two-front war. Israel has responded with tank and drone strikes to missiles being fired across the border. The British Prime Minister is in Israel. Rishi Sunak is also expected to visit other countries in the region. The German Chancellor says anti-Semitic displays won't be allowed at protests. He was speaking after pro-Palestinian demonstrations in the capital Berlin that led to almost 200 arrests. The embattled property company Country Garden has denied reports that two of its top leaders have fled China. It's trying to avoid a default and has failed to make the latest debt repayment. An international team has taken its first samples from waters near the damaged Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan. The UN nuclear watchdog has said produce from there is safe, despite wastewater from the plant being released, but China and South Korea have questioned this. The former Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has been given guarantees that he won't be arrested before appearing in court next week. He's planning to end the self-imposed exile he's been in after failing to appear in court on corruption charges. The winter lease for a popular roast chestnut stall in the Slovenian capital Ljubljana is up for auction again. The previous winner failed to pay the more than $50,000 he had bid for the right to sell the seasonal delicacy. That's the latest world news from the BBC.
This is Unexpected Elements from the BBC World Service. I'm Marnie Chesterton, and joining me from different continents are Katie Silver in Singapore and Phyllis Mwate in Nairobi, Kenya. We're leaving Madonna behind now and moving to a mystery. Phyllis, Katie and I probably consume a vast amount of different newspapers, blogs and other media, and sometimes one of us will find a story that crops up in one country but it needs sharing with everybody. It's a segment we like to call Under the Radar, and Katie, this week it's from your home country of Australia. Let's hear a bit of a clue about it.
It is interesting to reflect on, isn't it, that these crimes committed years ago, the perpetrators had no idea how DNA profiling would develop and how they could be caught basically by a few of their relatives trying to find out their genetic makeup or if they had distant cousins.
Right. Forensic genealogy is such a major leap forward in forensics that it I think it completely alters the landscape of criminal investigations, particularly for cases like this.
That was a clip from Outlook from the BBC World Service from a couple of years ago. So, Katie Silver, we're switching genre from pop to true crime, are we?
That's right. So pop, old news, so 1990s. But if anything defines the last decade, it's that rise of true crime. And, as you said, a story from my homeland, that is the Australian Federal Police has been upping its game in using DNA databases to solve cases of dead bodies that were never identified when they were found.
So, I can imagine taking a DNA sample and trying it against a database of individuals to see if there's a match, and this doesn't sound particularly new forensic science to me.
I know, Marnie, but stay with me. That's the thing. There are big databases of criminal DNA fingerprints that have been used over the decades to see if a DNA sample matches any known criminal who has already had their DNA fingerprint registered. But if there is no DNA in the database already, you're probably not going to learn anything. Enter a thing called forensic investigative genetic genealogy, quite a mouthful, which can sometimes help provide the missing link in a case. So that clip from Outlook was about the so-called Golden State Killer, who was eventually charged in 2018 for numerous murders and rapes in the US spanning decades. And crucial to finding him was the identification of fourth cousins.
Okay, and how did that happen?
So police managed to extract a new sample of the killer's DNA, and they sent it to a genealogy website that gave the names of relatives with approximate certainty. And from that, they were able to construct a family tree and then thin out the subjects based on age, whereabouts, and things like that.
I should add that if you want to hear more about that case, you can search for that episode of Outlook wherever you get your BBC podcasts. It's called Searching for a Serial Killer from My Bedroom. But surely, Katie, if no nearby relatives have put their DNA into these banks, you're going to have a problem. Like, I read that if you go back more than 450 years, everyone in Europe is related. What if the profile just says this person is 1% Viking, 6% Middle East, probably descended from Africans sometime in the past 1,000 years? I mean, that could be anyone.
It's true, but genealogy is a bit cleverer than that, and as the databases grow, they're getting more powerful. So it's about combining results with other forensic techniques. And I'll tell you about a bit of recent work from a cold case that happened in Kangaroo Island, which is off the south coast of Australia. So 40 years ago, a body was found near a tennis club in the bush by a teenager. Nobody ever managed to match the remains of the body with the missing person. And basically all that was known about it was that he was male, middle-aged, with a full set of teeth, and that he must have been dead for up to 5 years before he was found.
So no DNA had ever matched up?
Well, the AFP, or the Federal Police DNA team, had tried it in the national database, but as you say, no match had been found. So they were left only with the genealogical option that they uploaded it to, which is called GED Match. They found a first cousin once removed and a first cousin twice removed. And then the team were able to use public data, things like birth records, for example, to find an ancestral couple from the 1800s. Now that sounds great, but unfortunately this couple alone had 40 grandchildren, so it's a big family tree, and then they had to relegate many of those by age, sex, things like that, until they'd narrowed it down to one family of 10 children of roughly the right age who were living in New South Wales.
And I can imagine some difficult phone calls at this stage.
Yes, you can, but they found one brother who recalled that his brother, William Henry Hardy, had disappeared in the 1970s, and nobody knew what had happened to him.
So that's really sad. So that body by the tennis court was William's, but still no cause of death?
No, and it is very sad, but at least the surviving family have some sort of kind of sense of closure on a mystery almost 50 years later.
These sort of genealogical databases, they're privately owned, right? And I don't think anyone who does one of these check your ancestry DNA kits has thought that they'll be used in a police investigation. Aren't there some tricky privacy issues here?
Yes, so you're right, they are privately owned, and with many of them you can opt in or out of your data being available for forensic cases. In the US this is already a big thing, and many debates are to be had as to what the proper use of these facilities should look like. Should police have access to all of them, or is that a step too far? The other debate, of course, with all of this too is about insurance companies, and if these tests show you genetic propensity to certain diseases, should insurance companies have access to this? Now, ironically, William Hardy's brother had actually recently uploaded his own DNA to a database, which would have made it a whole lot easier, but it wasn't the one that the police had authorised access to. So for some, at least a sense of justice can be found, and I'm sure its use will likely increase.
Phyllis, how would you feel about having your DNA on a database like this? Ever tempted to do a DNA test?
Okay, so as you have said, there's potential for the information in the DNA database to be misused, right? And so, no, I am not comfortable. And also, I would not do a DNA test. I'm one of those people who just believes that if I don't know it, it won't hurt me. I am not for it. I know it has its pros, but not for me.
Not engaging at all there from Phyllis.
Yeah.
Katie, what about you?
I think I would. I haven't yet. But I think I would like to know more.
I don't know. I feel a little bit ooky. However, that said, I am remembering that about, it must have been over a decade ago, we tried to do a story for a science programme because we discovered that there was this dating site who offered to match you according to your genetics, which I was intrigued to know what exactly they meant by that. But we thought this is going to be an interesting 5 minutes of radio. So spat into a tube.
Did you do it?
So I sent off the form and the swab, slightly concerned that it was just going to match me with a bunch of eugenicists, but they gave our deposit back. They were very sorry, but they hadn't had enough people entering to make any kind of sort of useful pool from which to couple people off. So there we go.
You should do it. Maybe now there might be hope. Maybe more people have signed up.
Maybe. But Katie, thank you for sharing the story with the group. And talking of sharing the story with the group, if listeners want to do likewise, I want to know, have you done one of these DNA tests? Any surprises you want to share? And would you mind being in a genetic version of a lineup used by the police? Our contact details are unexpected@bbc.co.uk, or you can WhatsApp us on +44 330 678 3080, or you can write to us at Unexpected Elements, BBC World Service, Cardiff, CF10 4GA. So that's me asking you questions, but this works both ways. It's time for Ask the Unexpected. I bet there are times in your life when you've wondered about some aspect of how the world works. Well, we're here to help with our extensive contacts book of scientists. This week's question is from Simpliston in Sita, Uganda, who WhatsApped us asking, can fish drown in water? To answer, we called up Yuntao Zhou, an associate professor at Shanghai Jiao Tong University.
So the short answer is yes, fish can drown in the water because fish is like us. They also require oxygen to breathe. And in the ocean, fish requires dissolved oxygen, this kind of form, to breathe. So the water enter their gill and then the dissolved oxygen will be extracted. Most fish require actually a minimum dissolved oxygen concentration about 5 to 6 milligram per liter, but some may tolerate lower levels, some may tolerate higher levels. So when the dissolved oxygen concentration in the ocean is low for the fish, it's really hard for them to breathe. They may swim away, but if they don't have the chance, they may die because of the oxygen loss. So yes, fish can drown in water.
Thank you to Yun Tao, and thank you to Simplestone for asking that question. Panel, can I tell you about micro jellyfish?
Yes, please.
I was on my holiday in the Highlands of Scotland recently, and obviously what you do when you're on holiday is you go and do an interview with someone who runs a fish farm, and they were telling me they had a micro jellyfish infestation. And as temperatures rise, one of the things that we've been told is that some species do not so well and other species do really well, and one of the species that does really well is jellyfish. So they have this plague of tiny, teeny, tiny jellyfish that managed to get through the holes in the nets, and they clogged up the gills of this Atlantic salmon. And, you know, much in the same way as you might drown if your lungs filled up with jellyfish, sadly these salmon were suffering the same thing. So in the future we might have to eat the jellyfish. I know.
So the next question is whether or not we can eat jellyfish, and if so, how do we cook them?
Well,
that's another. Yeah, do you know the answer?
Well, so I was going to ask you, because I've had jellyfish before as part of Chinese cuisine. It was really good, but it was cooked by a professional chef, and he gave me quite a small amount, and I'm wondering whether that's something to do with it. Phyllis, ever eaten jellyfish?
Not really. Here in Kenya, most of us are carnivores, but in most local restaurants, you won't find that. No, you won't. Here, you just find, meat.
Yeah.
I've done some research, and you can actually here buy instant jellyfish, so jellyfish that you just add water to, and then eat it.
Wow!
It's edible. Yeah.
I dare you, Katie.
Just go and buy it myself. Okay.
And maybe we can crowdsource some recipes from our listeners. They're pretty good for recipes in general. So if you know how Katie should cook instant jellyfish, if she buys it in a market in Singapore, you can email your jellyfish recipes to unexpected@bbc.co.uk or WhatsApp us +44 330 678 3080. You can even leave a voice note via that number. Still to come, venomous versus poisonous. It's your correspondence. I'm not talking about your correspondence itself being poisonous. That's all very lovely. I should make that clear. That's coming up shortly after this. It's finally time to answer our snowy conundrum and learn what causes watermelon snow, pink, red snow in polar and mountainous regions. I asked, was it A, algae, B, salt deposits, or C, eroding rocks? Congratulations if you said A, algae. That pretty pink hue comes from a freshwater green algae called Chlamydomonas nivalis. In the summer, the algae produces a red pigment to protect itself against damage from the sun's UV rays. However, to awaken this dormant and cold-loving algae, the conditions must be just right. Like Goldilocks and her porridge, except in this instance it's not just temperature but sunlight, nutrient and water content that matter. Although the blooms aren't a risk to human or animal health, they do raise concerns because the darker colour of the snow absorbs more heat, causing faster rates of melting. We love it when you get in touch with stories and comments. For example, last week we discussed how the language multilingualists use for mental maths is the language they were first taught maths in. And David from California in the USA emailed us saying, native American English speaker here, but I learnt to count in French, can read Roman numerals and picked up some numbers in Russian. And while I don't do calculations other than in English, I do count dollars at the store in Russian or occasionally in French. Yeah, I sometimes count in French or Dutch, but that's to make up for the fact that I basically only speak English. You guys are multilingualists, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so which language, Phyllis, was the first one that you learned any maths in?
So for me was in my native language, that is in Taita. A long time ago, the education system in Kenya was that you start with your native language. So I did that first. And just as our listener says, David, recently I traveled to Thailand and I had to convert a baht to dollars and then to Kenya shillings, and I would do it in my head but in Taita, and it was really easy. I would try in English and I would just be like, okay, how much was that? But in Taita language it was very easy for me.
That's so cool. There's just clearly some sort of connection that's made in your brain and it goes, right, this is the maths language. It's the one that gets in there first. We also got picked up on our choice of words in a past episode by Bill, who emailed, on the 28th of September show of Unexpected Elements, you mentioned something about spiders in Ghana being poisonous. You really should learn the difference between poisonous and venomous. If you eat something and it makes you sick, it's poisonous. If something bites you and you get sick, it's venomous. Spiders are never poisonous unless you eat one and you get sick. Rattlesnakes are never poisonous unless you eat one and you get sick, but some spiders and all rattlesnakes are venomous. Thanks, and I enjoy the show, Bill. Thank you, Bill, and you make a very good point. And just to be on the safe side, Unexpected Element says, as well as trying not to get bitten by a venomous spider, I have read that if you do eat one, your stomach acid might break down the venom, but it might also bite you on the way down to the belly. So, one, make sure it's dead if you're going to eat it, or two, preferably don't eat spiders at all. I mean, here in the UK, we really don't have any dangerous spiders, I say, touch wood. So nothing particularly venomous that we need to be afraid of. Singapore's fairly safe, isn't it, Katie?
Singapore's fairly safe. Of course, Australia has a fair few, where I'm from and where I grew up, and you see spiders and things all the time. But I think you just kind of become desensitized to them. You're just like, okay, I'm not going to go anywhere near you. I can't identify the ones that are dangerous and aren't. But I know, for example, that if I see a spider, I'm just like not going anywhere near it.
It does seem that someone took a lot of the more dangerous animals of the world and plonked them all in Australia.
Yeah, we're just hardcore down there, Marnie, that's it.
So, in conclusion, don't eat spiders. Talking of eating things, somehow we always find our way back to fruit chat on this show, and a few weeks ago we started discussing eating banana peel, and the comments keep coming. So Anthony got in touch to say, I tried including banana peels in my diet. It encouraged my bowel movements a little. I'd only use organic bananas as there are so many chemicals on the other's skin. However, I do enjoy mangoes with the skin on, adds a tang to the sweetness of the flesh. And Anthony, you're not alone. Paul also got in touch saying, I always put banana in my foraging stews where they bulk things out like an aubergine might. The banana skins, roughly sliced, turn greyish and are almost invisible but good for bulk in the mass of the stew. Paul then went on to give us the whole recipe for his stew, which has over 40 ingredients, including desiccated coconut, nettles and tomatoes. So maybe that's one to add to our list for producers to make in a future show. There's producers nodding at me in a really unconvinced way. I think we should do this. I think we should have an end of year show where we store up all of the best recipes that we've been sent and sort of do a end of year feast for unexpected elements. And if you want to contribute to that, here's how you can get in touch with the show. Email unexpected@bbc.co.uk or WhatsApp +44 330 678 3080. Or write to us, Unexpected Elements, BBC World Service, Cardiff, CF10 4GA. The remit of this show is to look at the science behind the week's news, and over the past week there is one story that has dominated. The eyes of the world watch as events unfold in Gaza, and from Monday's NewsHour, this was the BBC's Tim Franks in Jerusalem.
There were two clocks ticking in Gaza. The clock that is ticking down to what's widely expected to be Israel's major ground offensive into the Palestinian territory. Hundreds of thousands of troops are massed on the frontier of the narrow strip that's home to more than 2 million Palestinians who since 2007 have been ruled by Hamas, the Islamist group labelled a terror organisation by Western powers, and the group whose gunmen overran southern Israel 9 days ago, killing more than 1,300 Israelis. The other clock that is ticking, and ticking perhaps much faster, is towards what the United Nations and other major humanitarian agencies are saying could be utter calamity for ordinary Gazans.
Now, war has rules, and one of those is that you don't target civilians. I'm interested in who is monitoring this and how. One NGO is Human Rights Watch. From an episode of the BBC World Service show Tech Tent, and from another conflict last year in Ukraine, here's Human Rights Watch's Richard Weir on how they gather evidence.
Well, oftentimes we're operating in very difficult information environments where access to information has been hampered by parties to conflicts. And so what we work to do is to compile as much information as possible from images, videos, other media, and then to backstop that wherever it is possible with testimony, interviews with people who have witnessed or who are victims. But ideally, what we do in order to carefully document an incident is to take all of these different pieces of information and types of information, and that's usually how we try to understand and get the most accurate picture of what's gone on. We take a lot of extra steps in order to ensure that the information that we're receiving is as accurate as possible. So that oftentimes means we're doing photo and video verification. So understanding, if something has been used before, where it's come from, what time, it was possibly either taken or posted, to help us understand, is this a legitimate photo claiming to be what it's meant to be of.
There's a lot you can tell about a video taken on someone's phone. Information called metadata that helps tell you where and when the video was taken and on what device. But technology can help even more. Wendy Betts from the International Bar Association is also the director of the app Eyewitness to Atrocities, and on the same episode of Tech Tent last year explained how the app is the gold standard for securing footage that hasn't been tampered with.
So many people have smartphones and they have access to social media platforms to share that information. So while it's very easy to collect and share digital information, it's also very easy to collect and manipulate and share digital information, which is very problematic. And so the idea behind Eyewitness is to give individuals a tool to make sure that that footage can be easily verified. And the way that we do that is to make sure that it collects where and when the footage was taken in a way that can't be altered, and that the footage itself can't be edited. So the integrity of that footage is intact. And then the way the app works is all footage is stored securely in a secure gallery inside the app. It's all stored encrypted on the device. So nobody, including the photographer, can access it or manipulate that information. And then from that secure gallery inside the app, it's transmitted encrypted to a server that Eyewitness maintains. And that way we can trace the full lifespan of that footage to know that nobody has had access to that to change it or edit it in any way. In legal terms, tracing that lifespan is called the chain of custody. So as footage passes from hand to hand, so from the photographer to an investigator to a lawyer, that creates a chain. And you need to make sure that that chain is unbroken, because if any link in that chain is missing, that footage is going to be looked at more suspect because changes could have been made during that gap. There's a lot of organizations that are doing very interesting work and very important work in verifying what is called open source information, so that footage that has been circulating in the wild. And there are some really good techniques that have been developed to do that, but it is still very time consuming and often may not be definitive to be able to verify it to a level that you would need for legal proceedings.
The BBC also has a team called BBC Verify that has, since the Hamas attacks, waded through and flagged up misattributed videos and photos. Journalist Cheyenne Zadari-Zadeh has a great long thread of all the different kinds of claims that they've fact-checked and found wanting. You can find him on Twitter as @Cheyenne86 because it's eye-opening to see the breadth of fake news out there on social media. So, for example, people sharing helicopter gun attacks which turn out to just be from a video game. Phyllis, is fake news something that you have to be particularly vigilant about in your work?
Oh, yes, sure, Manny. There's this narrative, that fake news is usually free, and so it moves really fast, meaning that people who cannot afford to pay, for quality journalism or who lack access to independent public service news media are very vulnerable to both, fake news, disinformation, and even misinformation. But, in this era of content creation, it might be difficult to stop the spread of fake news, but it's not impossible. So as a journalist, I still have to be guided by the media ethics. So you do have to verify before you put something out there.
The major thing I have to deal with fake news in terms of is China. That's our biggest frontier that we look at here, and trying to make sure that if we're reporting on China, or that the information that we have is the most accurate it can be, which is using kind of Chinese social media platforms like Weibo and the like. So we work with our colleagues in the Chinese service really to try and stand things up, but it is tricky. And I think as Phyllis was saying, we kind of have a rule that if it's not double sourced, we don't go with it. So the BBC, it can be late to the party, but it'll be at the party wearing the right outfit is the idea.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. So in grim times we need light and shade, and I hope that that's what we've provided on Unexpected Elements. So we've had a look at technology in war zones and technology that helps solve old police cases, but also technology that helped create a tiny record, mainly for the pure joy of doing it. Go science. My thanks to this week's panel. Katie Silver is staying up late in Singapore. Thank you.
Thanks, Manny. Always a pleasure. It's always worth it to chat to you too.
And Phyllis Mwate in Kenya, thank you.
Thank you, Manny. Here in Kenya we say Asante Sana.
Asante. I'm Marnie Chesterton. The producer was Ben Motley, with Alex Mansfield, Sophie Ormiston, Tom Bonnet and Margaret Cessa Hawkins. Studio production was from Sue Mayo. Join us next week for more Unexpected Elements.